Honey, what business trip? You just went last month. Her husband began to complain as soon as Tina shared the management's plans for the coming week. Yes, that's true. But Natalie got sick, so they're sending me instead. There's no one else, you understand. Oh, these kids. Women without children. Your management must be second-rate. What if those women have loving husbands who've forgotten what their wives look like? At this rate, we'll never have our own child, and we were really hoping for that. Stop, Tina interjected firmly. We agreed to discuss this only after you found a job, didn't we? Well, honey, you always bring this up, her husband replied, a frown creasing his forehead. Did you really have to snap at me again? It's only been 2 months since I left my last job. I'm tired of hearing from your mother and all your relatives about how I'm just sitting around, doing nothing. We've already talked about this. You said I could take my time looking for the right position. If I had to, I would get a job now. But with my experience and salary at my last job, I can't settle for something like being a janitor. Yes, I understand. I'm sorry, Tina conceded, mentally berating herself. After all, her husband was genuinely trying. Her relatives' outdated views had gotten under her skin more than she wanted to admit. How many times had her mother criticized her for achieving a good position, earning a solid salary, and buying an apartment on her own before marrying? As if that were a problem. In her mother's eyes, it was the husband's duty to provide for the family, not a 50-50 arrangement like it had been with Sam. And turning a man into a housewife was definitely not an option. But Tina hadn't done that. She had simply suggested that her husband take on more household responsibilities while he was home. Wiping the dust or doing the dishes wasn't a burden, especially since she was the one bringing in all the income. After leaving his last job, Sam had neither savings nor a clear plan. It was just how things turned out. Suko was worse off for figuring out a fair way to divide responsibilities. Tina had a substantial salary that could easily support both of them. Plus, John would quickly find a suitable job. His field was in demand. Where did this time? Yakov sighed wearily. Tina began her preparations. Although her flight wasn't for another 4 days, she always liked to get ready in advance to avoid any last-minute chaos. She remembered the sky-high prices she had encountered on her first business trip. After one trip to the store, she learned to pack her own medicines, food, and hygiene products. Otherwise, no salary would suffice. The business trip went smoothly. At the designated time, Tina arrived at the airport in her hometown, or rather, the nearest suburb, where she needed to catch a bus or taxi to get home. Since she had only one bag, and the buses ran frequently, she opted for the bus. Of course, she could have called her husband to pick her up, but that wasn't Tina's style. She believed it was wrong to burden others with tasks she could handle herself. Her mother often drilled into her that a man needed to feel like a man, claiming that being with an independent woman wouldn't allow that to happen. Tina dismissed these comments, along with all her mother's other unsolicited advice. Some might say she did so at her own peril. As she quietly opened the door to her apartment, she froze in disbelief at the sight of the familiar boots. Natalie had boasted about spending nearly 2 months' worth of salary on them, and she had driven everyone crazy with her insistence that Tina would recognize those boots in any situation. Now they stood in the shoe rack of Tina's apartment, accompanied by a recognizable fur coat hanging on the rack. From the direction of the bedroom, a distinct feminine sigh floated through the air. Exhaling slowly, Tina carefully switched on her phone camera and made her way toward the sound. The startled shrieks of the two cheaters when they realized they were being filmed felt like a balm to Tina's wounded heart. "You look beautiful. John, maybe you should consider a career in this line of work. I'm sure there are people who'd be willing to overlook your beer belly. That way, you could also solve your housing issues. She taunted. Housing? Wait, what are you doing? Her husband bleated in panic. They said on TV that all flights were delayed. Honey, you're supposed to be on a business trip for 3 more days. But then he switched to defensive mode. Oh, I see. You're trying to catch me in the act. Well, are you happy now? I think I'll just leave, Natalie whimpered, trying to shield herself with a sheet. But Tina, stronger and heavier, simply grabbed her by the arm, taking the bed linens with her, and dragged the rival down the hallway. Let her be thankful Tina didn't grab her hair. A shove in someone's back, a click of the lock. On the other side, frightened screams erupted, demanding the return of their clothes. Not that it was July or anything. In a bid to avoid causing any illness, Tina tossed her fur coat and boots out of the apartment. Admittedly, she did it out the window, which she made sure to inform her still screaming colleague about through the door. Oh, and by the way, she added, try not to scream too much. Someone might look out to see what's happening, and trust me, there's plenty to see, especially for the men. You've got it all wrong. Her husband bleated when Tina returned to the bedroom. It was a training exercise for conceiving a child, or were you already planning a career in that specific film industry, and this was a rehearsal? Tina asked, her interest piqued. She then declared that she would file for divorce herself, giving him just 1 hour to vacate the premises. There was nothing left to say to John. Frankly, Tina wasn't eager to engage in conversation with him either. She recalled that happiness should be shared, so she shared the footage with Natalie's husband. Otherwise, Natalie might show up at her home wrapped in a fur coat, claiming that Tina had attacked her for no reason and robbed her. And by the way, she needed to throw out all of Natalie's things. And the bed linens too. Just in case, she could never be sure how many other people had been there with John. She also made a mental note to check for any love tokens left behind the next time she had a free day. And of course, to file for divorce. What a mess he had created. Instead of renting a hotel room or finding a discreet place for his affair, he had managed to get caught and add to her problems. John moved his things out in several trips, whining about how he would have to take a job that didn't suit him at all. He tried to tug at her heartstrings and make her feel guilty, echoing phrases that sounded eerily familiar, like those her mother would use. Next to you, I don't feel like a man. You're too authoritative and independent. You crutch my male dignity, he lamented. Why didn't you earn enough to buy your own apartment before proposing to me? Why didn't you seek out a higher paying job or retrain for a more lucrative field? Is it my fault you see cheating on your wife in her own apartment as the only way to assert your masculinity? If you'd just gotten a divorce whenever you felt dissatisfied, that would have been more manly. Tina didn't say that last phrase out loud. Instead, she firmly showed him the door when he tried to bring up the idea of starting fresh. The most entertaining part was at work. Apparently, Natalie's husband had taken Tina's advice about sharing joy to heart and forwarded the footage to their management and colleagues. Considering one of the bosses was a friend of Natalie's husband, things took a turn for the worse for her. Either her bonus would be slashed, this time for a legitimate reason, not some whim, or she'd be sent on a business trip to a location that not even a reindeer sled could reach. Meanwhile, her colleagues chuckled behind her back, genuinely sympathizing with Tina. Tina didn't need anyone's sympathy. Whenever someone asked about her ex-husband, she would simply say that the trash had taken itself out of her life, and she was considering getting a cat instead. One of her colleagues took that as an invitation and sent her a picture of an adorable 3-month-old fluffy white kitten in a private message, offering to sell it for a symbolic $1,000. Tina jumped at the chance. With the cat around, she completely forgot about her ex-husband until Natalie unexpectedly reminded her. "Tina, I need to talk," Natalie said during lunch, approaching her in the cafeteria and sitting down across from her. "Make it quick. I'm hungry," Tina replied, baffled about what there was to discuss with this young woman. "John is living with me now," Natalie said. "But you know, our rented one-bedroom apartment is pretty cramped. You should hurry up and vacate your place, okay?" Tina barely managed to stifle a laugh. It was clear why Natalie had been so eager to lure John away. After all, she and her husband lived in an old two-bedroom apartment with his parents, and he had no intention of moving out, a fact that Natalie constantly complained about. In the past, Natalie had joked that if she ever found a man with his own apartment, she would get divorced and settle down with him right away. Everyone took it as a joke, but look how things had turned out. Her divorce plan had worked, but her new living situation was far from ideal. "I'm curious, why should I vacate the apartment I bought with my own money before we got married?" Tina asked, chuckling at Natalie's reaction. Waving her hand dismissively, she added, "Just get out of here and let me eat in peace." Natalie's frantic yelling into the phone, arguing with some Tim and Avril, added a comical touch to the scene. It looked like these two were about to embark on their version of a happy family life. They deserved each other, so let them be happy. Well, as happy as two people could be living in a rented one-bedroom apartment without steady jobs. It was clear that Natalie wouldn't last long at their company. As for John, things weren't looking up for him either. He shouldn't have tried to claim her premarital apartment. His legal fees were now a sunk cost, and with his difficulty finding a decent job, he was stuck with odd jobs. He had dug his own grave. Now he could lie in it.